Good afternoon and welcome to the member testimony hearing for fiscal year 2020 appropriations. We are happy to continue the tradition of inviting members of Congress to speak about the issues that are critical to their districts and that are important to them. While we may not be able to respond to every request, I can assure you that we will make sure that we are mindful of any of the requests that you bring to this subcommittee and do our best to accommodate you. And I believe that before I turn it over to our first member who is here, Mr. Billy Long, that I will turn it over to the gentleman from Tennessee, the ranking member, Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I look forward to working with you on this. And to our members who are here, I want to reiterate what the chair has said. We are very solicitous of the members' requests, and we'll do everything we can to accommodate. And with that, I yield back.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Royable Allard and Ranking Member Fleischman and the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for allowing me to come before you today to speak on the importance of H-2B seasonal worker visa programs. Many of us in this room represent districts with very small and seasonal businesses that are struggling to find local workers to fill seasonal temporary jobs. Despite extensive efforts to recruit locally, these seasonal employers in business sectors such as hospitality, resorts, carnivals, seafood processing, forestry, and landscaping rely on temporary, non-immigrating foreign workers through the H-2B visa programs to supplement their American workforce to accommodate the massive flows of visitors during the busy summer months. Without this program, local businesses and both the regional and national economy suffer because there is simply not enough American workers available during these peak and shoulder season months. I'm here today to ask for your support to include key H-2B visa program provisions in the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Fiscal Year 2020 proposal, H-2B visas. Many employers who use seasonal workers are in a crisis. They are beginning their season of high economic opportunity without either adequate numbers of willing and capable U.S. workers and without access to the much needed and valuable foreign non-immigrating temporary workers through H-2B visa program. Unfortunately, this program has unfortunately, this program has got caught up in the larger, important policy debates over both legal and illegal immigration. It is important to point out that these workers are not immigrants. They provide an opportunity for businesses to operate at a greater capacity, retain their full-time workers, and contribute to the local economies. The H-2B program sustains American jobs. In fact, every H-2B visa issued supports 4.6 American jobs on average. The H-2B visa program allows seasonal business to continue to fulfill their contracts and retain their American workers and make additional capital investments, expand their businesses, and maximize their contribution to the American economy. Unfortunately, there is a statutory cap on the total number of individuals who may be issued H-2B visas or otherwise granted H-2B status during the fiscal year. The program's annual 66,000 visa cap with a maximum of 33,000 available during the first half of any given fiscal year and 33,000 workers who begin employment in the second half of the fiscal year is not adequate to meet the demands of a growing economy. According to recent Department of Labor data, the demand for temporary seasonal workers with a start date between April 1, 2019 and the end of fiscal year 2019 exceeds 95,000 workers, almost 3 times the number of available H-2B visas for that time period. Often the cap is reached literally within days, if not hours, of when work petition applications are accepted. The program has essentially become a lottery as the demand for the visas is far greater than what is issued, leaving many seasonal employers excluded from the program with no access to legal seasonal laborers, leading to potential reductions in operating hours and closures. Without action, it is inevitable that the H-2B visa cap will be reached early on in fiscal year 2020. An increase in the H-2B visa allotment would certainly be a big step in the right direction. I understand firsthand of this program. Missouri's 7th Congressional District, which I represent, is a tourism hotspot. There's not enough capable and willing Missouri workers to fill all the peak seasonal jobs. I'm proud to represent such entertainment centers as Branson, Missouri, a small town just of over 11,000 people that takes in 8.5 million visitors every year. The deficiency in finding available employees in Branson affects everything from hotels to restaurants to theme parks to landscaping businesses. These are employers who have tried for years to fill the need for employees with locals and have been unable to do so. The H-2B program provides Branson's community and many other destination cities across the country the ability to find employees so that they can provide their services to the public. These seasonal destinations are very much dependent on such a program for commerce in an area that is effectively function. I would like to point out that the demand for seasonal employers is not limited just to tourism destinations in my district either. I have numerous businesses throughout southwest Missouri that rely heavily on seasonal labor to be forced to pass on substantial contracts or bidding on large projects because they're unable to procure a workforce. This is despite offering high pay and benefits. When H-2B visas are not available to these employers to fill gaps and to help them have people needed to complete projects, we all lose. Simply put, there are just not enough able individuals capable to fill these job openings. Again, I appreciate the committee's continued willingness to listen to the views of members like myself. I know the Appropriations Committee will face tough decisions and priorities for fiscal year 2020. For that reason, I respectfully ask for you to support any key H-2B visa programs in the Department of Homeland Security appropriations fiscal year 2020.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I too want to offer my appreciation for Chairwoman Robel Allard and Ranking Member Flashman for the opportunity that you give members to share their thoughts. And I also want to give an appreciation to this bipartisan spirit in this committee amongst your members and your ultimate and absolute commitment to the security of this nation, and particularly to the best practices for the Homeland Security Department, which I think more than anyone might imagine, impacts the lives of so many. And certainly the work that the chairwoman has done is to be highlighted, in particular giving members the opportunity to see firsthand on many of the issues that we have to address. So I first would like to say that I have served on the Homeland Security Authorizing Committee since or a little bit before the heinous, in the midst of the heinous tragedy of 9/11, as it was organized through a select committee and then the formation of the authorizing committee. I do think it's important to put on the record that there is much need from authorizers and appropriators to try to stand this department up. With the loss of the secretary, with an acting secretary, with the non-existence of an ICE director, a person who used to be with CBP is now the acting secretary. There's just many places that there is a great sense of need. And every place in Homeland Security is a front line for a potential terrorist act or for the impacting of the lives of people. I am from Texas, and I think you've heard a collective voice of Texans indicating that we believe in smart border technology, a smart border response, but we don't believe that the humanitarian crisis is responded to by the present policies. And so first I hope that we will focus more on increasing Border Patrol agents, increasing CBP, building more ports of entry, creating a more humane atmosphere. When many of us went in days past, we remember seeing the metallic blankets, and we saw them, and then we saw them. And so I think upon reflection, there has to be a better sense of keeping people warm or cool than that kind of use of materials, either because the place where they're being kept is not appropriately heated. I think it is also important that we have the opportunity for medical care at these sites. So let me quickly begin with the short time that I have left to say that I support, in addition to that, $10 billion for pre-disaster mitigation program, and certainly grateful for FEMA and all the efforts you made for those of us suffering from hurricanes that are still lasting from 2017, which was Hurricane Harvey. People are still trying to repair their homes and recover. I'm writing legislation to try to design a FEMA that can be disaster and then recovery, because people are enormously confused and they need some help continuously. I support $7.6 billion for TSA to fully address additional requirements and screening processes. I support $50 million for university programs, Homeland Security Centers of Excellence that have been very effective for HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions. I support robust funding for FEMA's hazardous mitigation, support $425 million for the staffing for adequate fire and emergency response, the SAFER program, support $750 million for the Urban Area Security Initiative, support $115 million for transit security grant programs, support $50 million for the Urban Area Security Initiative nonprofit security grants, and I support $50 million for National Urban Research and Rescue, support $10 million for immigrant integration citizenship programs within the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I think it is important to particularly highlight the Transportation Security Administration, which is the front line in aviation security, which still remains airplanes still remains the terrorist vehicle of choice when it comes to terrorizing America. I want to compliment the TSA agents and all of the federal workers who maintained their posts during the shutdown, and the TSOs were mostly impacted because some of them are making $18,000, 20, and 21 as starting agents. And so I wanted to acknowledge the importance of building that agency and strengthening it and giving them more FTEs in terms of ensuring the nation's airports. The Centers of Excellence I would like to highlight for this committee. They have been effective in the areas of transportation and cybersecurity, and I'd like to see them continued and expanded in our universities. Thank you all so very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson.
Thank you.
Chairwoman Roybal Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and members of the Homeland Security Subcommittee. I thank you for the opportunity you have given me today to speak on behalf of the over 42,000 men and women, including over 1,500 throughout New Jersey, who keep our country and our citizens safe from danger, and whom I am deeply proud to represent in Congress. I represent New Jersey's 2nd Congressional District, which encompasses over 40% of the state's land mass and is home to the United States Coast Guard Training Center in Cape May, the birthplace of the Enlisted Corps and the Air Station in Atlantic City. The Training Center in Cape May is the nation's only Coast Guard recruit training center and the 5th largest base in the Coast Guard. Its mission is to develop the enlisted workforce for the U.S. Coast Guard. Training Center Cape May is attached to more than 350 military and civilian personnel. More than 4,000 of America's finest young men and women arrive for boot camp here, the first chapter of their Coast Guard career. Air Station Atlantic City opened in 1998 and is the newest and largest single airframe unit of the Coast Guard's air station. It is located in the Atlantic City International Airport in Egg Harbor Township, along with another of South Jersey's crown jewels, the William Hughes Technical Center. Air Station Atlantic City is comprised of 10 MH-65D Dolphin helicopters and supports a wide range of Coast Guard operations, such as search and rescue, law enforcement, port security, and marine environmental protection. The air station also provides multiple aircraft and crews to protect our nation's capital 24 hours a day and 7 days a week at the National Capital Region Air Defense Facility under the operational control of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. At a minimum, I hope that this subcommittee provides $10 billion in discretionary funding to the United States Coast Guard, which would be equal to the fiscal year 2019 enacted level. This funding would allow the Coast Guard to secure our borders and disrupt drug and human trafficking and continue to save lives at sea. In particular, I request that the subcommittee fund the first phase of barracks renovation at Training Center Cape May at $30 million to recapitalize the barracks for those 3 recruit companies to accommodate both genders, including providing classrooms and administrative support. I also request that the subcommittee provide $2.6 million to recapitalize travel lift piers to meet sufficient load capacity and support boat maintenance at the Training Center Cape May. Furthermore, I ask that the subcommittee provide the necessary funding for a 3.1% military pay raise in 2020 to maintain parity with the Department of Defense for military pay. Finally, I would just like to comment on the recent impacts of the 35-day government shutdown. I don't think we should ever ask our dedicated federal employees to work without pay, but it was especially shameful that all the armed forces were paid except the United States Coast Guard, simply because it resides in a different department. The shutdown caused enormous hardship on Coast Guard families throughout South Jersey. We were fortunate enough that the South Jersey VFW, the American Legion, fire companies and rescue companies, churches, and community at large stepped up to help our Coast Guard families with food, diapers, monetary donations, and other essential items. This tragic and preventable situation showed why Cape May is designated as a Coast Guard community. In addition to hurting morale, the shutdown had real-life consequences that could hurt our long-term national security posture. It has been reported that the Coast Guard Ship Maintenance Command lost at least 28 years' worth of workdays, which poses a risk to operational availability of cutters and boats. The shutdown also contributed to a domino effect that has caused delays in repairs and maintenance of the Coast Guard's 200 aircraft, which would keep them from being immediately available. The delays could limit the number of ships and aircraft available for Coast Guard operations like drug interdiction, search and rescue, maritime safety missions, and training of both uniformed and civilian forces. I truly hope that we do not repeat the same mistake of needlessly shutting down the government, and that our nation's leaders, regardless of their views on immigration and border security, are able to do right by America's maritime guardians. I thank this subcommittee for its time, its work, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Roybal Allard and Ranking Member Fleischman. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share some ideas and offer up some requests to you on behalf of my community, El Paso, Texas. For the last 5 years, we've known that Central American families have been leaving their countries because of crushing poverty, starvation, violence, and persecution. The latest uptick in asylum seekers represents a significant increase in families arriving in El Paso, one that will likely continue and even increase, especially as the weather continues to warm. While I am very proud of El Paso's generosity and goodwill, the federal government has an obligation to help us with our growing local burden. The long-term solution to stemming this flow of people is addressing root causes in Central America. And until the president engages in any meaningful way on this front, I believe this is our new normal. So until we find a long-term solution, in the short term, border communities like El Paso need relief. That's why I'm asking the committee to urge Customs and Border Protection to allow non-governmental organizations to work in their processing centers in the fiscal year 2020. In the fiscal year 2020 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. This would allow migrants to concurrently be processed and connected to sponsors immediately after their release. Here's what happens today. When asylum seekers are apprehended at the border, they are processed by Border Patrol. In other words, they're screened for their criminal background history and they're fingerprinted. They're then transferred to ICE and released into the community to make arrangements on their own to their final destination somewhere in the U.S., where they will remain with a sponsor as they await their asylum hearing. In order to get to their sponsor, these families need help. When they are released by ICE, they frequently only have the clothes on their back and their child in their arms. So in El Paso and in other border communities, local NGOs and the faith-based community step in to provide them with a place to stay. We call them hospitality centers, where they get fresh clothing, meals, medical attention, all provided via donations, and help arranging transportation to their final destination. Arranging transportation to their final destination takes between 24 to 48 hours. Because of the increasing numbers of migrants, our NGOs have had to supplement more than a dozen hospitality centers by renting hotels to accommodate the migrants and their families, spending almost $13,250 per week since January 31st, 2019. This is unsustainable. Allowing NGOs to have a presence inside CBP's processing centers in order to have concurrent processing, in other words, CBP does its processing while the NGO arranges for this transportation to their sponsors, this will ease the strain placed on localities, and I urge the committee to consider including this in the fiscal year 20 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. My second request relates to bill language that would allow localities and NGOs the ability to be reimbursed for the humanitarian relief services we've been providing to migrants. I understand that the State Homeland Security Program and the Urban Area Security Initiative grants under the Federal Emergency Management Agency had the ability to do just that for fiscal years 13 through 17. I respectfully request that the committee consider once again allowing localities and NGOs reimbursements under FEMA. Communities along the southern border like mine must be able to respond quickly to the increasing number of migrant families with the peace of mind knowing that the federal government will help reimburse us for these costs. In my community, as stated above, Annunciation House, one of our NGOs, spends $13,000 a week to transport and shelter people. And this is above and beyond all of the generous volunteer donations of food, water, clothing, etc. While the Department of Homeland Security, we've been frustrated with the solutions brought forward so far, the reimbursement will help communities pick up the slack and continue to respond with generosity and kindness. My final request is connected to the migrant protection protocols announced by the administration on December 20th, 2018. We believe this is an ill-conceived policy which allows DHS to return migrants to Mexico for the remainder of their immigration proceedings. It's happened at San Isidro, and now it's happening at the El Paso Port of Entry. We are essentially asking that you defund MPP because it prevents asylum seekers from gaining due process by accessing their legal counsel and accessing their court date. I thank you very much for listening to my requests, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I just wanted to tell Representative Escobar I had the privilege of traveling to El Paso about a month and a half ago. You represent a beautiful city with wonderful people. It was an honor.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that you visited. Thank you.
Representative Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Roybal Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, good neighbor from New Jersey. and members of the subcommittee for allowing me this opportunity to testify about important items that I believe the subcommittee should address in its fiscal year 2020 appropriations bill. And I want to thank the subcommittee staff for working with my office to help craft these requests. I led, and also I would like to take the opportunity now to present these requests. First, I want to address an issue that came to light recently. Last month, USCIS announced plans to close all of its international field offices. These offices are critical for assisting with refugee and asylum cases, helping Americans who are adopting children from abroad, and processing applications to reunite families and combating fraud. The administration claims it will redistribute resources from closing international field offices to domestic offices in order to reduce caseload backlogs, and will shift other functions to consular offices. I believe the administration is presenting a false choice, and I ask that the committee address this issue in two particular ways. First, please include report language expressing that you support the continued operation of International Operations Division field offices, and urge USCIS to continue to operate and maintain all existing field offices at current staffing levels. Second, I hope you will find a way to ensure that USCIS is adequately addressing its growing backlog, whether through robust oversight or the provision of additional resources. More than 60 of our colleagues join me in submitting this request to the subcommittee, so there's ample support in the House for addressing this issue. Next is an issue that I have been working on since I came to Congress 2 years ago: the need to equip immigration and custom enforcement officers and Border Patrol agents with body-worn cameras. I believe coverage management of our border security apparatus needs increased review, transparency, and accountability. CBP has completed a 2-year pilot project, and ICE has just begun conducting its own pilot project thanks to language you included in February. I ask that the committee provide $10 million in funding to cover the cost of procuring the first set of cameras. This amount will support the rollout of approximately 10,000 cameras and their necessary docking stations, covering roughly half of the total number of border agents. Furthermore, given that ICE's piloting is on the way, I respectfully request that the committee's report to accompany the fiscal year 2020 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill include language requiring that ICE report to Congress on the status of its pilot and provide a timeline for completion. Finally, Representative Chuy Garcia and I led many of our colleagues in requesting that the committee prevent the Trump administration from shifting appropriated funds around to pay for constructing a border wall. So I would like to use this opportunity to highlight that request as well. I join a number of my colleagues in making various program and language requests to the subcommittee regarding the treatment of immigrants in detention, the separation of families at the border, and numerous other issues. So as I conclude, I would like to reiterate my support for these requests. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify and for all the hard work you do. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman Roybal Allard and Ranking Member Fleischman, for allowing me to speak to your subcommittee. I want to talk about the fiscal year 2020 appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security. As a representative from Texas, I believe I can provide unique insight into the situation on our southern border. February of 2019, shortest month of the year, Customs Border Protection reported 76,000 apprehensions and inadmissibles on our southern border, an increase of well over 100% from the same period last year. While many migrants come seeking a better life or freedom from persecution, we cannot ignore the fact that our porous border also encourages the transportation of illegal drugs, violent criminals, and human trafficking to the United States. The illegal drugs coming across our border often end up in the hands of those struggling with addiction, fueling the opiate epidemic that has killed so many Americans. Last Congress, the Energy and Commerce Committee originated the Support for Patients and Communities Act, the most comprehensive legislation to combat opioid abuse in our nation's history. Despite this progress, the resources included in this law will not dent the supply of addictive opioids if heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanil continue to cross our border. Just 3 months ago, Customs and Border Patrol seized the largest amount of fentanyl in our history, enough to kill 100 million people. We cannot truly address the crisis of illicit drugs if they continue to flow into our country freely. I'm also concerned by the number of women and children that are trafficked here. Our words matter. It is well known that our Customs and Border Patrol and ICE officers are bound by immigration laws that can be easily exploited. Traffickers and even legitimate asylum seekers know that it is easier to remain in the United States if they enter with a child. Smugglers are facilitating a dangerous journey for these individuals and collecting a sizable fee in return. Last year, I traveled to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, where I learned that many families sell or leverage their homes or farms to pay the between $6,000 to $10,000 fee for smugglers. Some take loans from banks and pay them back using remittances from a relative or child now in the United States. To stop this cycle, Congress must act on President Trump's promise to secure our southern border. We should also continue to support the brave men and women keeping our country safe. When Customs and Border Patrol apprehends an unaccompanied alien child, they must transfer the child to the care of the Department of Health and Human Services, their Office of Refugee Resettlement, within 72 hours. When this crisis began in 2014, the Office of Refugee Resettlement was not equipped to deal with the influx of children and their unique needs. Through the work of the Energy and Commerce Committee, we improved the standards of care. Children now receive medical care and are housed in facilities that are much nicer than previously. They can attend classes, they can participate in recreational activities. I've visited numerous of these facilities over the years and can attest firsthand to the improved conditions over what was the baseline in 2014. However, most migrants, including the unaccompanied alien child, spend their first hours or days in an overcrowded and under-resourced Customs and Border Patrol facility or an ICE detention center where agents are not typically trained to provide medical care, mental health counseling, and other services. At current resource levels, these agencies are overwhelmed by the number of migrants in their custody. ORR is even evaluating locations for new and permanent shelters. In his fiscal year 2020 budget, President Trump requested funding to hire additional officers, additional immigration attorneys, invest in new technology, and expand capacity at existing facilities. He has also asked Congress to appropriate $5 billion for new border barriers. The situation at our southern border cannot be ignored. We must allow our agents and our officers to enforce our laws and protect our country. I ask you to provide President Trump's full fiscal year 2020 funding request. And again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to testify before you today, and would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you,
Okay,
John.
thank
Thanks.
The committee is going to recess, and we will come back. We have two more members who want to testify. would like to ask Mr. Hill to please come forward.
Well, I thank the chair for the time and the ranking member. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in your hearing today and talk about the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program and the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, the SAFER Act grants. Fire departments need adequate staffing, equipment, and training to keep our communities safe, and these programs have a significant impact on fire departments in my home state of Arkansas. While I've been in office since 2015, fire departments in my district have received $7.3 million through these two grant programs. 16 individual fire departments have received 27 grants, with the highest award being $2.6 million, a SAFER grant to North Little Rock, Arkansas Fire Department, and the smallest being an $8,000 AFG grant to the Shaw Fire Department. This shows that even the smallest award changes the lives of those who are living in our communities. With a small $19,000 AFG award received by the Burnett Ridge Fire Department, they were able to purchase thermal cameras, which is a game changer when responding to serious calls. Burnett Ridge, a small town of less than 300 people, was able to purchase a new brush truck, which allows the fire department to go off-road to fight forest fires. Before they received the grant funding, they were using a converted 1965 military truck. In Arkansas's 2nd Congressional District, our departments need a new self-contained breathing apparatuses desperately, especially our small departments, where their materials are old and outdated and no longer certifiable for operations. Our departments are in need of turnout cabinets. Firefighters are putting their lives on the line not just in the immediate risk of bodily harm, but in the increased risk of harmful contaminants. Compliant washer extractors cost over $12,000 per unit, and forced ambient air gear dryers needed to extend the life of that gear cost over $10,000 per unit. This is well over the budget for most of the departments in my district. They need these units to clean out their gear after runs to remove harmful contaminants. In Central Arkansas, we have a strong community spirit, and the firefighters know that if one department is able to purchase one of these turnout cabinets, then the area departments, especially volunteers, will be able to keep their turnout gear safe and well maintained. Assistance to firefighter and SAFER grant funding is necessary for fire departments in my district. The needs are too great for them to do it alone, and we're proud to support them in their applications. These grants have changed the communities and make the area exponentially and unmeasurably safer. And I'm grateful for this committee's action, your leadership, Madam Chair, and the ranking member, and appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the people of the 2nd Congressional District of Arkansas. And I yield my time.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to see you again.
Before you begin, let me just say thank you for making our trip to Puerto Rico not only informative, but very enjoyable.
No, thank you for your time and your leadership to going to the island. I really appreciate all you did, and the members of the committee as well. And thank you for having me here, ranking member, as well. And today I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify on the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. I want to focus my testimony on just on two matters on the subcommittee jurisdiction that are vital to my constituents. First, the need to prioritize border and maritime security efforts in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And two, the need to ensure that FEMA implementation of the Stafford Act disaster recovery provisions does not impair the ongoing rebuilding process in the two territories. Unfortunately, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands continue to have some of the highest crime rates in the nation. Law enforcement agencies report that anywhere between 60 and 80% of the murders committed in the two territories are drug-related. As you are aware, the U.S. Caribbean border has long been exploited by drug trafficking organizations as both as our destination and transshipment point for illicit drugs shipped to the mainland, endangering the lives of Americans in the two territories and the continental United States. For instance, according to the Drug Enforcement Administration, 16% of all the cocaine coming into the United States in 2017 moved through the Caribbean. In the fiscal year 2017, the U.S. Customs and the Border Protection Agency's officers seized approximately 66,000 pounds of narcotics in and around Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And actually, 30 minutes ago, in Puerto Rico, the Coast Guard just caught 800 kilos of cocaine, more than any previous year on the record. Given these statistics, it is critical that Congress ensure federal law enforcement agencies, particularly CBP and the Coast Guard. Actually, CBP is the only office that is out of the mainland. It is in Puerto Rico and got jurisdiction over Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, have the necessary resources and assets and funding to enhance border security operations in the maritime area of Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, home to the approximately 3.3 million American citizens. To better understand and confront threats and the needs in the U.S. Caribbean border, I'm requesting that the subcommittee include language requiring the Department of Homeland Security to report on its counter-drug operations and ongoing efforts to address operational needs in the transit zones as defined by the National Defense Authorization Act in fiscal year 2017 and throughout the Caribbean basin, specifically in and around Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Additionally, I'm requesting that the subcommittee continue including bill language allowing CBP to sustain or increase operations in Puerto Rico with appropriated funds, a provision that has been included in every enacted appropriations bill since the fiscal year 2015. My third request to the ongoing disaster recovery process in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands is that in the aftermath of the hurricanes Irma and Maria, Congress amended the Stafford Act, specifically in sections 2601 of the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 to require FEMA to rebuild outdated infrastructure in the two territories to meet industry standards that will better withstand disasters and hence reduce the need for future federal assistance. However, FEMA's interpretation and implementation of the pre-disaster condition language in that section run counter to the intent of the legislation approved by Congress. I am therefore requesting language requiring FEMA to abide by the law and Congress intent instead of creating new definitions and exclusion for covered services. Additionally, to require FEMA to follow Public Law 254, the Disaster Recovery Act, Reform Act, to accelerate the project formulation and funding process in Puerto Rico, including by accepting fixed estimate grants once certified by a licensed engineer and collaborating with local partners to achieve site evaluations and project worksheet approvals within the allotted times. Once again, thank you for your consideration of this request and for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Are there any questions?
No, thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.